Hello all of you out there, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 most powerful art creatures, so let's get into it. In at number 10 is the Basilisk, and this creature is definitely very well renowned for its damage dealing abilities. And what would you really expect? This is a massive snake which can deal so much damage to so many creatures and can really ruin any Arc player's day if used effectively. And the only real downside about this thing is its slightly annoying taming method. Slightly is really an underestimate. Very annoying taming method where you have to use Rock Drake eggs on Operation, but you can use Magmasaur eggs and Wyvern eggs as well if you want to. Then drop them around it without aggroing it, and then you'll tame yourself one of these things, and that can be an absolute drag, especially if you're using Rock Drakes on Operation for Rock Drake eggs and you haven't got a Rock Drake yet. That can be a complete drag, but I don't know why you would just get Rock Drake eggs for a Basilisk before even getting a Rock Drake. But in terms of their damage, obviously these things have a very powerful bite, but they also have a torpor dealing ability on top of that too. Next up, we have the Rock Drake, and again with the Operation theme. And this creature really cannot be missed out in any sense at all in terms of powerful creatures. This thing has an insanely incredible bite, also dealing a wealth of damage compared to its size and transportability ratio. As yet, it is all good having a big, hunking, powerful creature, and actually they are in at the number 1 and number 2 spots, but it is also very important in a creature like this to have the mobility to go around, and its size to damage ratio is absolutely insane, although it definitely is not the most powerful art creature. Otherwise this thing would be in number 1, but I'm sure you can infer that because this thing is in at number 9. In terms of just its bite though, it deals a lot of damage, but also it does have a great glide ability as well, which no other art creature before that really had. And I'm pretty sure it can't do what the Griffin can do and dive onto creatures and deal damage to them, but still its bite, which I keep saying, I feel like a broken record, it just deals so much damage, and it really can't be discounted when it turns in turns of the Rock Drake's abilities. That kind of bite is just what makes this thing so powerful. But what would you expect? That kind of is the main ability that most carnivores have to deal damage. Now, next up we have the Rex, and this had to be in the list at some point realistically. This is one of the best boss creatures, partly because it is allowed into boss arenas, but also it is just a very well balanced creature, meaning it has a good health stat and a good damage stat to go along with that too, which some other creatures like the Spino and the Aloe can't really compete with, especially when it comes with health. The Spino does do a little bit more damage than the Rex, but it doesn't have enough health to keep up with it, which is why in my opinion the Rex is a more powerful creature. Although this isn't a video about tanks, otherwise creatures like the Stego would be here, but creatures like the Stego pale in comparison compared to the Rex. This creature is just so buff and beefy, and really what would you expect from a carnivore of this size and with a head and teeth that big? You can tell this thing is going to really pack a punch. But low level ones aren't actually the greatest and can be extremely weedy, especially in the stamina and weight department. So if you are taming a Rex, I would definitely say go over level 100 for your first one, as they really aren't very difficult tames, especially on ASA now, as the babies are really easy to find. But unless a really other random circumstance happens, like a Rex gets trapped, or you just find a baby Rex on ASA, which can simply be tamed by press of a button, always try looking for above level 100 Rexes, as that is going to give you the best results, and it is also meaning that if you do breed those Rexes in future or tame more above level 100s, you're going to have a significantly higher chance of defeating those bosses. Now, the Golem again can't be discounted. This creature is literally a living tank. Although we aren't talking about tanks today, and apart from it being a tank, it also packs an absolute punch when it comes into damage. This thing is insane at dealing any kind of damage to any kind of creature, really. No creature can really stand this creature in terms of buffs against it, and I'm pretty sure no creature really does have a buff against it, apart from those which has a buff against all creatures. That was really an irrelevant point there. But either way, the Golem is an insanely powerful creature, and you can just see how quickly it shreds through this Death Worm. And if you have a rock golem, then it is really easy to tame a mantis, as those death worms are going to be some of the easiest things to kill. Sadly, you can't really take these things into bosses, at least I don't think you can, but still in the real world Ark map, just around the map, these things are absolutely insane. And especially if you transfer cryopods onto Scorched Earth, or just make cryopods on Scorched Earth, these things can be a really good wyvern trench destroyer, as they can just kill all the wyverns in the trench, and then boom, these wyverns are going to be really easy to tame. Next up, we have the Reaper, and this creature again is just one of those creatures which has to be on this list for so many reasons. It is a creature of immense power, and it is just absolutely insane how much damage this creature deals, and its taming method is an absolutely amazing one to go on top of that as well. Unless you're on Gen 2, then it is an absolute cheese. But on Operation, it is a real experience to tame yourself a Reaper, and that is something which I really enjoy about this creature. Its taming method, and once it's tamed, there's just such a big journey and sense of progress once tamed one. And also, on top of that, it does deal a hefty amount of damage, although I'm pretty sure it is not allowed into boss arenas. And the Reaper kind of stands with creatures like the Giga in terms of damage, and although they're not as big as a Giga, they definitely pack punch like the Giga does, although not quite as much, but their size is a lot smaller as well, and they are significantly more mobile, which the Giga simply doesn't have. In at number 5 is the Rhinognatha, and would you really expect any other creature to take this spot on the list, or even be up in the kind of central part of this list? Obviously, this is one of the newer Ark Tames, so I can't really put it in at number 1, as we haven't seen its full potential yet, as it hasn't been used for absolute years, but also it hasn't really been nerfed in any kind of way. And the fact that this thing can pick up Rexes and absolutely decimate bases is really something to be said. These creatures deal an insane amount of damage to anything. Like I said, they can absolutely destroy bases and ruin everyone's life apart from the person riding it. And also on ASA, you'll find an abundance of these things, whereas on ASE, these things are extremely rare. And on ASA, I have had several encounters with these things, and with their wealth of abilities, you can easily pretty much demobile another player on a creature, or just anything which you're trying to kill or take for yourself, and then simply dispose of it as you wish, which is not really anything any other Ark creature has, at least to this extent. And it kind of does make sense for its insane power, considering its really long taming method, which requires a hell of a lot of resources if you want 100% effectiveness, although that is not required to get the absolutely insanity out of this creature. And a net gun is going to be extremely helpful in taming it, but obviously in ASA at the moment we don't have access to the net gun, so this thing is actually somewhat even more difficult in ASA, especially because there are more of these things lying around, and when taming one or killing one to get the pheromones, you can really get yourself in a pickle if another one comes around. But also in the early game, if you're flying around on your Pteranodon 2 and one of these things faces you, you're going to have the worst time. Just say goodbye to that Pteranodon. Whereas with Nagi, it might be able to withstand a little bit if it's a low level, but still, these things are absolutely insanely OP, and their taming method kind of roughly follows the Reapers. Next up, we have the Shadowmane. And the reason why I am saying this creature is more powerful is also because it is a lot more useful in some scenarios out there. This thing has the pack buff, it has the hydration buff, and it can even go invisible too, and the list even goes on further than that. But I can't really remember what other abilities this thing wields. Its main claim to fame obviously being that this thing is allowed in bosses, and like the Deinonychus, it is absolutely insane for that. But in the real world too, this thing can jump to incredible heights, meaning that no Pteranodon is safe in the sky when you have one of these things. And you can just see there how high I actually jumped. It is absolutely insane with the mobility of this creature. Also, it can even charge its damage up over time, and it is really great in the water too. Its only real downside is the fact that its taming method is an absolute slog and is one of the hardest in the game in my opinion. Speaking of the Deinonychus, in at number 3 is the Deinonychus, and the reason why I think this creature is more powerful than the Shadowmane is pretty much because this thing has all the same buffs as the Shadowmane, but one insane advantage. This thing obviously still has the pack buff. Sadly, it can't go invisible, but its mobility is still extremely high, having no full damage and being able to climb up walls. But the main thing its claim to fame has to be is the fact that this thing can inflict insane amounts of bleed damage. Not sure if the Shadowmane can deal bleed damage. I don't think so, as that creature is allowed into bosses, and this is the only creature which is allowed into bosses which has that bleed damage, and it works on bosses too. And when you have a pack on these things, and then you can just absolutely decimate bosses with these things, it is an absolute cheese for every single boss which you face. And I really can't wait for these things to be in ASA when Valguero comes out, on ASA obviously, but we still have them on ASE to enjoy all of the time. These things are pretty much some of the easiest tames in the game, which is really to their benefit of power as well, especially considering their size. They're pretty much the same size as a raptor, but a raptor cannot face this thing in any sense of damage, health, mobility, any of that. This is essentially just the raptor on absolutely insane steroids, and this creature will not disappoint you in any circumstance. In at number 2 is the Giga, and you can probably tell why these things are now on the list and why this thing is at number 2, and from this you can probably guess what's in number 1 anyway. But in terms of the Giga's abilities, this thing is an absolute hunk when it comes to power. Sadly, when it is tamed, it loses its bleed ability, although it is still a beast of anything damage, and its health is one really to be reckoned with. Killing a wild Giga is significantly harder than killing a tamed one, but still one which is tamed will take an absolutely immense long time to actually kill. Unless you're facing the Alpha King Titan, then it might have an easier job of killing all of your Gigas. But that's why you assemble an absolute army of those things. And there's only one other creature which you could really use for killing those Titans, which is obviously the creature which is in at number 1. And the fact that this creature is in ASA already, although not very useful until Extinction comes out, it is insane that we still have this creature around. Obviously, it was first introduced on the island in 2016, and it was an absolute beast then, and it still is an absolute beast now. Its only real downside is its absolutely abysmal abysmal stamina, also very annoying rage meter, and just general inconvenience. And in at number 1 is the Carcharodontosaurus, which for some reason YouTube chapters always thinks it is a Kronosaurus, and I have no idea what a Kronosaurus is. Maybe it is just a Carcharodontosaurus, but made out of cryopods. Who knows at this point? But the reason why I think this is a more powerful creature than the Giga is mainly because it is a faster creature, it has more mobility, and also when its blood rage is full, it will deal more damage than the Giga, so therefore it is just a more powerful creature. And it doesn't have the rage meter as well, so it effectively has more health too, as the Giga is unusable after that rage meter is full, whereas this thing can go all the way down to 1 HP, and then from there obviously this thing is going to die. Sadly, once tamed, you'll have to dismount it, which is a little bit of an annoying one due to its taming method being very different from the Gigas, basically allowing you to feed it dead creatures and then ride it around, and then obviously kill loads of creatures to get it up to 100%. So it's a little bit sad that you get dismounted off of it, but it kind of does make sense. This thing is an absolute beast, and you really should give it a go. But also, just before I do the outro of this video, I know the Titans and the Titanosaur could be very good on this list. The Managama is another one as well, and also just so many other creatures which I have missed on this list. And I know sometimes you have some other opinions on these things, so always leave them down in the comments below. The top 10 most versatile Arc Tames. In at number 10 is the Snow Owl, and this creature has a huge variety of abilities, And actually, the abilities which this creature has is absolutely insane, and it is incomparable to any other creature. And there are definitely loads and loads and loads of uses for this thing. Firstly, it can be a really great travel mount for traversing any kind of map due to that glide ability. And compared to something like the Griffin, it feels significantly smoother and faster, which actually makes it a lot more of a fun creature to use. But also they do have a somewhat heat-seeking ability, which will help you track down any kind of dino or organism or just general player in a PvP scenario or PvE scenario that you maybe can't see with your own eyes, or if you're just trying to spot someone that's hiding somewhere after they try to raid your base, or if they're just trying to raid your base, then you can easily see them with this mechanic, which is a really nice, cool feature to have. And also you're going to want to pump loads and loads of stamina into these things, not just so they can fly longer distances, but also so that you can heal up creatures, which is their kind of main ability. These things can freeze any creature, that be enemy creatures, wild creatures, or your own creatures, and heal them up for a period of time. That obviously depending on your amount of stamina, which can be really useful for healing up your creatures in a boss fight, and also really useful if you're trying to tame a creature and you need to quickly heal that thing up to get it up to a reasonable amount of health so you can continue firing tranks into it. Next up is the Basilosaurus, and this creature is so versatile for anything underwater, and I'll pretty much use no other creature apart from this thing for any kind of underwater exploration, and their damage is still really solid as well. So when it comes to combat, these things will definitely put up a fight. Have no idea what you're going to be doing when pitting up a fight. Don't really know what that is. Either way, in terms of their other uses, apart from just being great for just general underwater exploration, they're great in the underwater caves as well, and they're immune to things like jellyfish and electric eels and all of those kind of things, which no other creature to this day has, which is absolutely insane to think about, but it really gives you a sense of immunity on the ocean. The Basilo will also passively make oil as well, just as a nice little thing. But definitely, if you have one of these things, take into mind that they do have a depth limit, and they'll take some damage if they go too deep under the sea. Next up, we have the Astrodelphis, and this creature is definitely one of the newer ones, being introduced a lot later on in Ark's life, obviously being a Gen 2 creature. May have already said that already, but if not, it's a Gen 2 tame. And Gen 2 is notoriously known for its wealth of OP creatures, and the Astrodelphis definitely falls under that category. And it is one of the best travel mounts out there, being capable of absolutely zipping across the map and looking really cool at the same time, which you could also do if you subscribe to this channel. You can be the coolest Ark player out there. But also in terms of their other abilities too, they deal a very significant amount of damage, and they can also fire somewhat lasers out of their tech saddle as well. And the tech saddle is the only saddle which they have, which is their main downside really, as that can be an absolute pain to get. But if you prepare for it adequately and you get to the right level, then it isn't the hardest thing that you'll face on Genesis Part 2. And when taming one, you really won't regret it. Although seemingly expensive on the surface, requiring a lot of element is one of the easiest things to get on Gen 2, and you'll have no problems. And considering how useful this thing is for travel and for dealing damage and for missions, it really is versatile. In at number 7 is the Shadowmane, and yet again another Gen 2 creature, and this thing just has such wealth of ability that it has to be put on this list at some point. It is absolutely crammed with abilities. It is just so full of abilities that it has to be put on this list. It is a really agile creature, which is also very capable of defeating bosses and dealing insane amounts of damage. But you can see its agility there by just how high this thing can actually jump. It's actually really absurd. The insanity, don't know why I use so much alliteration there, but this thing can jump insanely high. And it also does have the hydration buff and the pack buff too. And it is really great underwater as well, which can't be said for many other carnivores. And also, considering its size, it is really easy to take anywhere, and it doesn't even require a saddle. Its only real downside being its absolute pain of a taming method, but it's definitely well worth it. Now, the Velonosaur has to be included on this list. This creature just has so much usability in so many areas. Firstly, and uncommonly, this is a very good travel mount, and considering its size, it really does make sense. It is that right size of carnivore where it is quick and reasonably agile, and it has good mobility in terms of its turning circle, and it can really get around the place, and its stamina drain is next to absolute nothing. But also, it is great as a turret as well, as that's kind of its main use overall. This thing is a literal living turret, an absolute beast of a creature. This thing just packs so much when it comes into that turret ability. And sadly, that doesn't scale when you level up melee damage, but still, this is an incredibly useful ability for so many reasons. Not just because it's going to deal the most damage, because it isn't the most damage dealing ability out there, but because you have that range and you can absolutely pepper creatures with these things, and they fire so fast, and with so many at one time, you can deal insane damage to any creature. Definitely a really cool use, which I think Wildcard should revisit in a new creature sometime. In at number 5 is the Maywing, and this creature is pretty much the epitome of travel. And yes, the other creature, which was earlier on the list being the Astrodelphis, is a very good travel mount as well. But the reason why this is higher is partly because it actually does go faster than the Astrodelphis when in full glide, and albeit it does glide instead of fly. But also, this thing's saddle is unlocked at level 19 instead of like level 117 or level 120 something. I think it's more 100 teens when the Astrodelphis is. But either way, this thing's saddle is unlocked at level 19, and it is one of the easiest tames in the game, just being a very simple knockout tame, and boom, feed it berries or meat. I can't actually remember if it's a herbivore or a carnivore, but they're both very attainable in the early game. Haven't really tamed a Maywing in a while, as I haven't played Gen 2 for ages, and only recently I have just been breeding these things. Obviously, I've been breeding these things for a while, but in terms of recent uses of the Maywing, I've just been breeding them. They're also great for raising creatures as well, as they act as a portable feeding trough, and they can gather berries too. So if you're in a pinch, especially in these early stages of the game, level 19, that can work really in your favour. Now, the Deinonychus is just one of those creatures which has to be on any list for versatility. This creature just has so many vast uses, and it is just one of those more creative creatures from Wildcard in my opinion. And there are just so many reasons to use this creature, namely obviously for bosses, as its bleed ability will carry into bosses. Not that any other creature's bleed ability won't carry into bosses, it's just they're not allowed into bosses, as creatures like the Thyla aren't allowed into bosses. I don't know, Karna's bleed ability, I'm pretty sure, don't carry onto bosses. And also creatures like the Carcharodontosaurus. Yes, I think that bleed ability may work on Titans, but I'm not really sure about that. But for the general bosses, the Deinonychus bleed ability is going to carry, especially when you can grapple onto those creatures and just rip them to absolute shreds. And also their pack buff is going to apply here, as you're obviously going to be using these things in packs, which makes these things even stronger, which is something which can't be said for some other creatures on this list. Although the Shadowmane is a very great pack creature, creature as well. But also these things are significantly great climbers compared to the Shadowmane, and although they can't jump to great heights, they can still do all kinds of cool parkour jumping along the rocks, in this case the chalk cliffs on Valguero. Definitely a really good tame, and compared to the Shadowmane, it has a significantly more friendly taming method. In at number 3 is the Desmodus, and this creature obviously being one of the newer creatures added to Arc coming out on Fjorda, which yes wasn't the closest amount of time ago, but it still is very recent in the grand scheme of things in terms of Arc, as it is the newest map I think to come to the game. Not sure when Svartalfheim released, and I think that's on ASA now, but Fjord is kind of considered the kind of more recent map, and it definitely is a very recent map coming after Gen 2. But obviously in terms of its versatility, it is a great travel mount, again for that gliding ability like the Snow Owl. It can also make Sanguine Elixir, meaning that tames are an absolute cheese with this thing, as 30% of it is done instantly like that. They can also grapple onto walls and ceilings like the Tapejara can, although not sure if the Tapejara can grapple onto ceilings. Just make sure not to dismount when using this ability, and it can also go invisible in the night, although I never got that to work on this B-roll, as stupidly I was on Extinction, and for some reason the gliding animation seemingly glitched here. In at number 2 is the RG, and the RG has to be on the list for versatility. It is one of those creatures which needs to be counted on this list, as it is just so versatile in all of its uses, namely obviously being one of the best, if not the best, creature to take up to the mountains and do some meta runs. And you can kind of put the Anki and the Dodic in this spot as well, as when paired with the RG, they are a great combination, gathering you insane amounts of metal, flint, and stone, and all of those resources which a pickaxe and a hatchet are going to get you, but in even higher amounts. And this is obviously helped by the RG's weight reduction on things like metal, crystal, and obsidian. But they can also pick up a wealth of creatures as well. Obviously they can pick up the Dodic and the Anki, but they can actually pick up some pretty sizable creatures. Although not as big as what the Quetzal can carry, you don't really need that for doing metal runs and things like that. And if you want to carry a friend with you, if you're carrying a player across the map, if you're doing a cave or something, that is when I would use the RG apart from metal runs. And also they do have a couple of hidden little abilities up their sleeve as well. Their saddle acting as a portable smithy, so again if you're doing a cave run, you can quickly repair your flak armor, as I'll always be using flak in a cave instead of having to go all the way back to base to repair it. And also if they eat a dead corpse, they have a really nice, neat, quick regen ability, which can't be said for some other carnivores. And in at number 1 is the Thyla, and the reason why I am putting this above the RG in terms of use is because I'm not really a fan of how flyers deal damage. And although this isn't the best metal gathering creature out there for doing metal runs, it still is pretty decent, as its weight and stamina can keep up, and with its wealth of climbing abilities, a mountain hike isn't really that difficult to do. Although the terrain can be pretty annoying on ASA, but on ASE it is some of the easiest things that you will ever face when using the Thyla. But also, unlike the RG, which is the main reason why I'm putting this higher, it really does pack a punch in terms of damage. And it does deal that bleed ability as well, which is really essential in a carnivore. Sadly, the RG doesn't have it, but if it did, it would most definitely be in number 1, and if its turning circle was maybe a little bit better. But also the fact that this thing can climb up vertical walls and jump off of redwood trees and pounce onto things too. There are just so many cool uses for PvP and for PvE Arc players to use this thing for, even though I mainly think it is more leaned towards PvE players, as this thing isn't really any kind of turret tank, but it can be pretty good for scouting out a base. No idea what's wrong with my voice today. Or just general, maybe smaller raids if you just want to climb over someone's fence and then just demolish all of their creatures, as these things can easily kill something like a Rex if you've got a good level. Again, that bleed ability is going to do a wealth of damage towards them, so they really are, in my opinion, the most versatile Arc Tame out there. But anyway, that was the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one. And as always, comment down below what are the most versatile Arc creatures, and I'll see you all later.